When cowboy Ezra Cole pays $50 for a deaf girl at a dusty Arizona saloon, he believes he's saving her from a cruel fate, but Rebecca has been hiding a dangerous secret that could destroy them both. As her father returns with hired guns demanding $300, will the truth she's been concealing for 5 years become their salvation or their doom? The desert heat could kill a man in 3 hours, but Ezra Cole had learned to read the signs that kept him breathing. Sweat that stopped flowing meant death was coming. Shade that looked too good to be true usually was. And men who smiled too wide in places like Tombstone's Silver Dollar Saloon were planning something that would hurt. Ezra pushed through the saloon's swinging doors, his boots hitting warped wooden floors that had seen more blood than beer. The Arizona Territory in 1887 didn't forgive mistakes, and he'd made enough to know better than to trust his first impression of anything. Outside, his horse waited with saddlebags heavy enough to buy a small ranch or get him killed, depending on who noticed. "Whiskey," he told the bartender. A mountain of a man with scars crossing his knuckles like railroad tracks. And information about the northern trail to Phoenix. The bartender poured amber liquid into a glass that had seen cleaner days. "Trail's clear if you don't mind Apache hunting parties. They've been stirring since the cavalry pulled back last month." Ezra nodded, sipping whiskey that burned less than the desert sun but more than his pride. 3 years of cattle drives had taught him that information was worth more than gold, and both were worthless if you couldn't stay alive long enough to spend them. He'd come to Tombstone to resupply and gather news, not to get involved in other people's trouble. But trouble had a way of finding him anyway. "Now, I ain't asking for charity." A voice cut through the saloon's smoky air like a rusty knife. "Just a fair price for quality goods." Ezra turned toward the sound and felt his gut twist. Near the back corner, a man with tobacco-stained teeth stood beside a table where a young woman sat with her head bowed. Her auburn hair was pulled back so tight it looked painful, and her hands were folded in her lap like she was praying. The man speaking wore clothes that had once been fine but now carried the stains of too many nights sleeping rough. His face held the particular cruelty of someone who'd learned to profit from desperation. Around the table, 3 other men leaned forward with the hungry look of wolves circling wounded prey. "She's pretty enough," one of them said, reaching out to lift the woman's chin. "But damaged goods is damaged goods, Thorne." The woman didn't react to the touch, didn't even seem to notice when the man's fingers traced her jawline. She stared straight ahead with eyes that looked like they'd seen too much and learned to show nothing. "Damaged." Thorne laughed, the sound carrying no humor. "Hell, boys. She's perfect for what you need. Can't hear a word you say, so she can't repeat your business to anyone. Can't complain about how you treat her. Can't even scream loud enough for neighbors to notice." Ezra's hand moved toward his gun without conscious thought. He'd seen plenty of evil in his 28 years, but selling women like cattle made his blood run cold. The whiskey in his glass might as well have been poison for all the taste it had now. "Course, she does have some skills," Thorne continued, his voice taking on the practiced tone of a man making a sale. "Keeps house real neat, cooks better than most, and she's got a gentle way with sick folks. Nursed her own mother through the fever before the Lord took her." One of the prospective buyers leaned back in his chair. "If she's so useful, why sell her?" Thorne's smile turned brittle around the edges. "Man's got debts that won't wait. Sometimes you sacrifice what you treasure most to keep what matters." The lie came so smoothly that Ezra almost believed it. Almost. But he'd grown up around liars and cheats, had learned to spot the tells that gave them away. Thorne's eyes never quite met anyone's gaze when he spoke about treasuring his daughter. His fingers drummed against his leg in the nervous rhythm of a man spinning tales. More telling was the way the young woman's shoulders tensed whenever Thorne spoke, like a horse expecting the whip. She might not be able to hear his words, but she sure seemed to know when his attention was on her. $150. The largest of the buyers said finally. "And that's being generous for a girl who can't even answer when spoken to. She's worth twice that to the right man," Thorne protested. But Ezra could hear the desperation creeping into his voice. "Look at her hands, soft, but not lazy soft. She knows how to work." The negotiation continued, with Thorne's price dropping and the buyer's interest growing colder. Ezra found himself studying the young woman more closely, trying to understand what bothered him about the scene beyond its obvious cruelty. Something about her posture seemed wrong for someone truly deaf. She sat too straight, too alert, like she was listening to every word despite showing no reaction. When Thorne gestured broadly, she seemed to anticipate his movements before they happened. $60, the lead buyer said finally. Final offer. Take it or we walk. Thorne's face went gray. 60? She's my own flesh and blood. Flesh and blood that can't hear thunder if it breaks over her head. $60 or nothing. The silence stretched like a taut rope ready to snap. Ezra watched the young woman's hands clench tighter in her lap, saw the way her breathing changed even though her expression stayed blank. Either she was reading lips better than most hearing folks, or Jeremiah Thorne was lying about more than just his paternal feelings. I'll give you 75, Ezra heard himself say. Every head in the corner turned toward him. The young woman's eyes met his for just a moment before darting away, but in that brief contact, he saw something that made his decision for him. Intelligence, fear, and a desperate hope that she was trying hard to hide. Well now, Thorne said, his voice brightening like sunrise after a long night. Seems we have ourselves a bidding war. But Ezra wasn't looking at Thorne anymore. He was watching the young woman, seeing the way she held herself like someone balancing on a knife's edge between salvation and damnation. Whatever game was being played here, she was the one with the most to lose. And Ezra Cole had never been able to walk away from someone who needed help, even when helping them might get him killed. The bidding didn't last long once Ezra made it clear he had real money and the will to use it. The other buyers grumbled about outsiders driving up prices, but they lacked the cash to compete with a man who just sold 3 years' worth of cattle in Tucson. Sold to the gentleman with the honest face, Thorne declared when Ezra's offer reached $100. Though I'll want to see your money before we shake hands. Ezra pulled a leather pouch from his vest, counting out gold coins that gleamed dull yellow in the saloon's lamplight. Each coin represented weeks of sleeping under stars and eating beans from a can, of dodging Apache raids and watching friends die from rattlesnake bites. He'd planned to use this money to buy land, maybe start his own ranch. Now he was buying a person. The thought made his stomach turn, but not as much as watching her be sold to men who'd see her as something to be used up and thrown away. At least this way she'd have choices. At least this way she'd be safe until he could figure out something better. Pleasure doing business, Thorne said, scooping up the coins with greedy fingers. He turned to the young woman, speaking slowly and making exaggerated gestures. Rebecca, this here's your new employer. Mr. Cole. Ezra Cole. Mr. Cole's bought your contract, girl. You go with him now, do whatever he says, and maybe you'll eat regular for once. Rebecca stood slowly, smoothing down a dress that had been mended so many times it looked like a patchwork quilt. She kept her eyes down, but Ezra caught the way her jaw tightened when Thorne spoke. If she really couldn't hear him, why did his words seem to affect her so much? She got any belongings? Ezra asked. Thorne waved dismissively. What you see is what you get. Never needed much, being simple like she is. The word simple hit Ezra wrong. He'd been watching Rebecca closely since the bidding started, and nothing about her seemed simple. The way she held herself, the intelligence that flickered behind her carefully blank expression, the fact that she seemed to understand far more than she let on, none of that spoke to a simple mind. Come on then, Ezra said gently, offering Rebecca his arm. Let's get you somewhere better than this. She hesitated for a moment, looking between Ezra and Thorne like she couldn't quite believe the transaction was real. Then she placed her hand lightly on Ezra's sleeve, and he felt the tremor that ran through her fingers. They were halfway to the door when Thorne called out, "Oh, Mr. Cole, one more thing you should know about your purchase." Ezra turned back, not liking the smile that had crept across the older man's face. She may be deaf and simple, but she's got a stubborn streak a mile wide. Sometimes needs firm handling to remember her place, if you catch my meaning. The implication hit Ezra like a physical blow. Rebecca's hand tightened on his arm, and when he looked down at her, He saw fear and shame warring in her expression. Whatever firm handling meant, she'd experienced it before. "I don't believe in hitting women," Ezra said quietly, his voice carrying enough steel to cut glass. "Or children. Or anyone who can't hit back." Thorne's smile faltered. "Well, that's your choice, I suppose. Just don't come crying to me if she gets uppity." "Won't be coming back at all," Ezra replied. "This business is finished." He guided Rebecca through the saloon doors into the blazing afternoon heat. His wagon waited where he'd left it, loaded with supplies for the journey north. The two horses stamped restlessly in the heat, eager to be moving. "This your first time leaving Tombstone?" he asked Rebecca, then caught himself. If she couldn't hear him, talking wouldn't do much good. But she turned toward him anyway, nodding slightly. Either she was reading his lips with remarkable skill, or his suspicions were correct and Jeremiah Thorne was a liar on top of being a bastard. Ezra helped Rebecca onto the wagon seat, noting how she positioned herself to keep an eye on the saloon doors. Smart. In a town like Tombstone, you never knew when trouble might come calling, and a woman alone was trouble's favorite target. "We'll be traveling for several days," he said, speaking clearly in case she could read lips. "I've got food and water, blankets for sleeping rough. Won't be comfortable, but it'll be safe." Rebecca nodded again, her hands folded in her lap with that same careful precision. She sat like someone who'd learned not to take up too much space, not to draw attention to herself. It made Ezra want to hunt down everyone who'd ever made her feel like she needed to shrink herself small. As they rolled out of Tombstone, heading north toward mountains that shimmered like mirages in the distance, Ezra found himself stealing glances at his passenger. She watched everything of the way other travelers moved, the flight patterns of hawks overhead, the subtle changes in the landscape that spoke of water or danger ahead. For someone supposedly deaf and simple, she seemed remarkably alert to her surroundings. 3 miles out of town, when the desert had swallowed Tombstone's noise and dust, Rebecca spoke for the first time. "Thank you." Her voice was soft, barely audible over the wagon wheels and harness leather, but it hit Ezra like thunder. He pulled back on the reins so hard the horses tossed their heads in protest. "You can hear," he said. It wasn't a question. Rebecca's face went white as desert sand. For a moment, he thought she might try to deny it, might retreat back into the performance that had kept her safe. Then her shoulders sagged like someone dropping a weight she'd carried too long. "Yes," she whispered. "I can hear everything." The admission hung between them like smoke from a distant fire, full of implications and dangers Ezra was only beginning to understand. In the space of 2 words, everything he thought he knew about the situation had changed. Rebecca wasn't a deaf girl who needed protection. She was a young woman who'd been playing a role so dangerous and complex that discovery could mean her death. And Ezra Cole, who'd thought he was performing a simple act of charity, had just bought himself a mystery that might get them both killed before they saw another sunset. Thunder crashed overhead like the world was splitting apart, and Rebecca knew her carefully built lies were about to crumble with the storm. She gripped the wagon seat as Ezra stared at her with eyes that demanded answers she wasn't sure she could give without getting them both killed. 5 years, she said, her voice barely cutting through the wind that had started howling across the desert. "I've been pretending for 5 years. Lightning split the sky, illuminating Ezra's face in harsh white light. His expression wasn't angry like she'd expected. It was something worse. He looked hurt, like her deception had cut deeper than simple lies should have. "Why?" The single word carried the weight of every question he wasn't asking yet. Rebecca watched dark clouds gathering above the mountains ahead. The storm was moving fast, the kind that could turn dry creek beds into killing floods in minutes. They needed shelter, but she needed him to understand why she'd built her life around a lie. Because dead girls don't get beaten for overhearing business they shouldn't. They don't get blamed when secrets slip out during card games. They don't get promised to men as payment for gambling debts. The first fat raindrops hit the wagon like bullets. Ezra looked around frantically, spotting a rocky outcrop about a quarter-mile ahead that might offer protection. He snapped the reins, urging the horses forward as the sky opened up and tried to drown them. When did it start? He shouted over the growing roar of rain on canvas. The night Ma died. I was 12, hiding in the kitchen while Father met with men who smelled like whiskey and violence. They were planning to rob the silver mine payroll, talking about killing guards like they were discussing the weather. The wagon lurched through a wash that was already starting to run with muddy water. One will hit a hidden rock, throwing Rebecca against Ezra's shoulder. For a moment, she felt the solid warmth of another person who might actually care what happened to her. I gasped when they described shooting the mine foreman's son. Just a boy, really. Father heard me and came storming into the kitchen, ready to beat me senseless for eavesdropping. So I pretended I hadn't heard anything, acted confused, pointed to my ears, shook my head like I didn't understand. They reached the outcrop just as hail began mixing with the rain, ice stones the size of marbles bouncing off everything in sight. Ezra guided the wagon under an overhang that provided partial shelter, though water still dripped steadily from the rock ceiling above. And he believed you? Rebecca pulled her shawl tighter, shivering from cold and memory. He wanted to believe it, made his life easier if I couldn't report his business to the law. Within a week, he was telling everyone in town that his daughter had been struck deaf by the fever that took her mother. Lightning illuminated the desert around them, showing a landscape transformed by water. What had been dusty emptiness an hour ago now ran with streams that would be gone by morning, leaving only the memory of moisture in cracked earth. The town doctor never questioned it. Why would he? Father was respected then, before the gambling and drinking got so bad. And I was just a grieving child who'd lost her mother. People felt sorry for me instead of suspicious. Ezra unhitched the horses, leading them to the back of the overhang where they'd be protected from the worst of the storm. His movements were careful, methodical, but Rebecca could see the tension in his shoulders. Learning that someone had lied to you was hard enough. Learning they'd lied about something so fundamental felt like betrayal. What about school? Friends? How did you keep up the act for so long? Father pulled me out of school after Ma died. Said I needed to keep house and help with his business. The few friends I'd had drifted away when they thought I couldn't hear their chatter anymore. After a while, it was just easier to stay home and avoid situations where I might slip up. The storm raged around their small shelter, turning the world beyond into a wall of gray water. But inside the protected space, Rebecca felt something she hadn't experienced in years, the relief of telling the truth to someone who might understand. I learned to read lips so I could follow conversations, learned to anticipate what people needed, so they wouldn't get frustrated trying to communicate with me. I became invisible, just a helpful shadow moving through Father's house. But you heard everything, Ezra said quietly. Everything. Business deals, card games, meetings with men who wouldn't have spoken freely if they'd known I could understand every word. I learned which ranchers were struggling with debt, which merchants were cheating their customers, which officials could be bought with the right price. Thunder rolled across the sky like a giant's bowling ball, echoing off canyon walls and mesas. The violence of the storm matched the chaos Rebecca felt inside, the fear and hope warring in her chest as she waited to see how Ezra would react to her revelations. That's dangerous knowledge, he said finally. Deadly knowledge. 3 of the men who used to meet with Father are dead now, killed by partners who thought they were talking too much, or by lawmen who got too close to their schemes. If anyone suspected I could hear their conversations, she didn't need to finish the thought. They both understood what happened to people who knew too much in a place where justice came from the barrel of a gun. So when your father decided to sell you, he needed money fast, owed gambling debts to men who don't accept payment plans. I think he figured selling me to someone far away would solve 2 problems. Get him the cash he needed and remove a witness who might someday cause trouble. The rain was starting to ease, though water still rushed through gullies carved by countless previous storms. Soon they'd be able to continue their journey, but Rebecca knew their relationship had changed forever. No more comfortable silence, no more simple assumptions about who she was and what she needed. I should have told you the truth from the beginning, she said. But I was afraid you'd take me back to him if you knew I'd been lying. Ezra turned to face her fully, water dripping from his hat brim. Rebecca, I wouldn't take you back to that man if he was the last person on earth. But if we're going to travel together, if you're going to be safe, I need to know everything. What other secrets are you carrying? The question hung between them like a challenge. Rebecca realized this was her chance to start fresh, to build something honest with the first person in years who'd treated her like a human being instead of property. But honesty was a luxury she wasn't sure either of them could afford. The morning sun painted the desert in shades of gold and crimson, transforming yesterday's storm-soaked landscape into something almost beautiful. Rebecca sat beside a small campfire, watching Ezra check their supplies with the methodical care of a man who'd learned that details could mean the difference between life and death. "Coffee's ready," she said, pouring the dark liquid into 2 tin cups. Steam rose between them like morning mist, carrying the rich smell that had become her favorite part of their daily routine. They'd been traveling together for 6 days since the storm, and each morning brought the same careful dance of politeness. Ezra treated her with respect, even kindness, but she could feel the questions he wasn't asking, the distance he kept because he didn't know what other lies she might be hiding. "Thank you." He accepted the cup, their fingers brushing briefly. The contact sent warmth up her arm that had nothing to do with the hot metal. "How much further to your uncle's place?" Rebecca almost choked on her coffee. In all her planning, she'd never told Ezra where they were actually going. She'd been so focused on escaping Tombstone that she hadn't thought about what came next. "My uncle?" she managed. "Where else would we be headed? You can't go back to your father, and you'll need family to take you in somewhere safe." The assumption hit her like cold water. Ezra had rescued her planning to deliver her to relatives, not to keep her traveling with him indefinitely. Of course, what man would want to burden himself with a woman who brought nothing but trouble and complicated secrets? "I don't have an uncle," she admitted quietly, "or any family besides father." Ezra went very still, his coffee cup halfway to his lips. "Then where exactly did you think we were going?" The question she'd been dreading finally arrived with the force of yesterday's thunder. Rebecca set down her cup with hands that shook slightly, staring into the fire rather than meeting his eyes. "I don't know. I just knew I had to get away from Tombstone, away from the men father owed money to. I thought maybe I could find work somewhere, earn enough to support myself." "What kind of work?" Ezra's voice was gentle, but she heard the concern underneath. "Most jobs for women require references, family connections, some kind of reputation. You don't have any of those things." Rebecca had considered this problem during the long hours of wagon travel, turning it over in her mind like a puzzle with missing pieces. The answer wasn't pretty, but it was honest. Cooking, cleaning, caring for sick folks. Maybe working in a boarding house or hotel where they don't ask too many questions about where you came from. That's barely surviving, not living. It's better than being sold to the highest bidder every time father needs money. They sat in silence while the fire crackled and desert larks began their morning songs. Rebecca watched Ezra's face, trying to read the thoughts moving behind his dark eyes. Was he calculating how quickly he could be rid of her? Planning the gentlest way to abandon her in the next town? "There might be another option," he said finally. Hope fluttered in her chest like a trapped bird. "What kind of option?" "My family has a ranch north of here, near Prescott. My mother's been sick, needs someone to help care for her. My brother Marcus has been managing things alone since I left, but he's better with cattle than housework." Rebecca's heart began beating faster. "You're offering me a job?" "I'm offering you a chance to earn honest wages while staying safe from your father and his creditors. It's not permanent. Nothing ever is. But it's better than wandering from town to town hoping for charity." The offer was more generous than she dared hope for, but Rebecca had learned to look for hidden costs in every kindness. "What aren't you telling me? Why would your family take in a stranger?" Ezra stood and began kicking dirt over the fire, his movements sharp with some emotion she couldn't identify. "Because my mother raised her sons to help people who need helping. Because Marcus could use another pair of hands, even if they belong to someone with a complicated past. And because you feel guilty about buying me like a piece of livestock." The words escaped before she could stop them, hanging in the air like smoke from the dying fire. Ezra went completely still, his back to her as he processed the accusation. "Maybe," he said quietly. "Does that change whether you want the job?" Rebecca considered this. Guilt wasn't the worst motivation for kindness she'd encountered. At least it suggested he had a conscience, which was more than she could say for most of the men in her experience. What happens when your mother gets better? Or when your family decides I'm more trouble than I'm worth? We deal with that when it happens. Right now, I'm offering you 6 months of honest work and a place to sleep where nobody can touch you without going through me first. The promise hit her harder than she'd expected. When was the last time someone had offered to protect her instead of using her? When had anyone cared enough to stand between her and danger? "There's something else you should know before you decide," she said, the words tasting like medicine. "Father didn't just sell me because he needed money. He sold me because keeping me around was getting dangerous." Ezra turned back toward her, his expression alert. "Dangerous how?" "Some of the men he does business with have started asking questions about his deaf daughter, wondering if she might have heard things that could cause problems for their various enterprises. Father was running out of excuses for why I couldn't be questioned more thoroughly." The implications settled between them like a rattlesnake coiled to strike. Rebecca watched understanding dawn in Ezra's eyes, followed quickly by anger that made her step back instinctively. "They were planning to torture you for information, or kill me to make sure I couldn't testify against them if the law ever came calling. Either way, Father decided selling me to a stranger was safer than keeping me around." Ezra ran a hand through his hair, processing this new layer of complication. "Do any of these men know where you've gone? Would they follow you?" "I don't think so. The sale happened quickly, and Father didn't advertise where his buyer was heading. But eventually, someone might start wondering what happened to Jeremiah Thorne's deaf daughter." The desert wind picked up, carrying the scent of sage and the promise of another hot day ahead. In the distance, a hawk circled something hidden in the brush, patient and deadly in its hunting. "All the more reason to get you somewhere safe," Ezra said finally. "My family's ranch is isolated, defensible. If trouble comes looking, we'll see it coming from miles away." Rebecca nodded, not trusting her voice to remain steady. She'd been prepared for rejection, for abandonment, for the casual cruelty she'd come to expect from the world. Instead, she'd found someone willing to shelter her despite the dangers that followed in her wake. "Why are you helping me?" she asked. "Really, you don't owe me anything." Ezra began loading their gear into the wagon, his movements efficient but unhurried. "Maybe because I know what it's like to feel trapped by circumstances you didn't choose. Maybe because everyone deserves a chance to start over when their old life becomes impossible." He paused in his packing, looking directly at her. "Or maybe because in 6 days of traveling together, you've shown more courage and decency than most folks manage in a lifetime." The compliment caught her off guard, warming places inside her that had been cold for so long she'd forgotten they existed. But with the warmth came fear, the terrible vulnerability of beginning to hope that someone might actually value her for who she was rather than what she could provide. As they climbed back onto the wagon and resumed their journey north, Rebecca allowed herself to imagine a future beyond mere survival. A place where she could use her real voice, where her thoughts and opinions might matter, where the skills she'd hidden for years could finally serve a purpose beyond simple deception. It was a dangerous dream, she knew. Dreams had a way of turning into disappointments, and disappointments in her world often proved fatal. But as the wagon rolled toward mountains that promised cooler air and perhaps even safety, Rebecca decided that some risks were worth taking. The gunshot echoed across the valley like the crack of God's own whip, and Rebecca knew their peaceful journey was about to become a fight for survival. Ezra threw himself sideways, pulling her down behind the wagon seat as a second bullet splintered the wooden bench where her head had been moments before. "Stay low," he shouted, drawing his Colt with smooth precision. "How many riders?" Rebecca peered through the wagon spokes, counting the dust clouds rising from behind the rocky outcrop ahead. "For maybe 5. They're spreading out to surround us." Her heart hammered against her ribs, but her mind stayed clear. 5 years of pretending to be deaf had taught her to observe everything, to catalog details that might mean the difference between safety and disaster. These weren't random bandits looking for easy money. They rode with purpose, positioning themselves like men who knew exactly who they were hunting. "It's them, isn't it?" Ezra asked grimly, checking his ammunition. "Your father's business partners." "Has to be. Father must have told them about the sale, described you and the wagon." Rebecca grabbed the rifle from behind the seat, surprising Ezra with her quick movements. "They've come to tie up loose ends." Another shot rang out, this one striking the water barrel and sending precious liquid streaming onto the desert floor. Rebecca watched their lifeline disappearing into thirsty sand and felt anger replace fear. These men had stolen her childhood, turned her into a living ghost, and now they wanted to murder her for the crime of existing. "Can you shoot?" Ezra asked, noting how naturally she handled the rifle. "Father taught me when I was 10, back when he still hoped I might be useful for something besides keeping house." She checked the weapon's action, finding comfort in its familiar weight. "Told me every frontier woman needed to protect herself, even deaf ones." The irony would have been funny if bullets weren't flying over their heads. "There's a dry creek bed about 50 yards to our right," Ezra said, scanning their surroundings. "If we can reach it, we'll have cover and a way to move without being seen." "What about the horses?" "They'll have to take care of themselves." "Ready?" Rebecca nodded, gripping the rifle tighter. They burst from behind the wagon together, running in a crouch while lead whistled past their ears. The creek bed was deeper than it looked, carved by flash floods into a natural trench that offered blessed protection from the shooters above. "This way," Ezra whispered, leading her downstream toward a bend that would hide them from direct observation. "We need to split them up, make them come at us one at a time instead of all together." Rebecca followed, staying low and quiet despite the panic clawing at her throat. The creek bed smelled of old water and sage, its sandy bottom soft under their boots. Overhead, she could hear the attackers calling to each other, coordinating their search. "Found their tracks," one voice shouted. "They went into the wash." "Miller, you take the north end. Johnson, circle around south. Rest of you come with me down the middle. We flush them out like rabbits." Rebecca recognized the voice, Tom Bradley, one of Father's regular card partners and a man who'd looked at her with hungry eyes whenever he thought no one was watching. Knowing he was out there made her skin crawl, but it also told her something important. "They want me alive," she whispered to Ezra. "At least initially. Bradley's the type who'll want to have his fun before finishing the job." Ezra's jaw tightened. "Over my dead body." That's probably part of their plan too. They reached the bend just as footsteps echoed from the wash behind them. Rebecca could see where the creek bed curved away toward a cluster of boulders that would provide excellent defensive positions. But between their current spot and safety lay 30 yards of open ground with no cover at all. "I'll go first," Ezra said. "Draw their fire while you make the run." "No." Rebecca's voice carried surprising steel. "I'm smaller, faster, and a harder target. You're the better shot, so you should be the one providing cover." Before he could argue, she was moving, sprinting across the exposed space while Ezra's rifle cracked behind her. Shouts erupted from multiple directions as the hunters realized their prey was escaping the trap. Rebecca dove behind the largest boulder just as bullets began chipping rock around her position. She turned immediately to provide covering fire for Ezra, her shots forcing Bradley's men to duck instead of aiming carefully. "Nice shooting," Ezra gasped as he slid into cover beside her. "Where'd you learn to shoot like that?" "Hunting rabbits when Father was too drunk to remember feeding me," she replied, reloading quickly. "Amazing how accurate you get when missing means going hungry." A new voice called from somewhere above them. "Miss Thorne, we know you can hear every word I'm saying." Rebecca's blood turned to ice water. They knew. Somehow they'd discovered her secret. "Your daddy told us the truth before we put him out of his misery," Bradley continued. "Said you've been listening to private conversations for years, collecting information that don't belong to you." The words hit Rebecca like physical blows. Father was dead. Whatever protection his paternal status might have provided was gone forever. She was truly alone now except for the man crouched beside her, a stranger who'd already risked his life to keep her safe. "We ain't unreasonable men," another voice shouted. "Come out peaceful. Tell us what you heard and who you might have told, and we'll make it quick. Fight us, and we'll take our time." Ezra looked at Rebecca with grim understanding. "They can't let either of us live now. We know their faces, know they killed your father. This ends only one way." Rebecca nodded, surprised by how calm she felt. For years, she'd lived in terror of this moment, when her deception would be discovered and the consequences would come calling. Now that it was here, she felt almost relieved. No more lies, no more hiding, no more pretending to be less than she was. "How many bullets do you have left?" she asked. 12 rounds, plus what's in the rifle." "I've got 8. Against 5 men, that should be enough if we're smart about it." "You sound like you're planning something dangerous." Rebecca smiled, and for the first time in years it felt completely genuine. "I am. But first, there's something else you should know about me." "Now? Really? Especially now." She met his eyes directly. "I can read and write better than most men. I speak 3 languages. I've been keeping father's books for 2 years, which means I know exactly how much money every crooked deal in Tombstone has generated." Ezra stared at her. "You're not just a witness to their crimes. You're a walking record of everything they've done. Every theft, every bribe, every murdered rival. Names, dates, amounts, locations. It's all stored up here." She tapped her temple. "Which means they can't just kill me quietly and hope the problems go away. They need to know how much I remember and who else might have access to that information." Understanding dawned in Ezra's expression. "They'll try to take you alive, which gives us an advantage they don't expect." Above them, the voices were getting closer as the hunters closed in on their position. Rebecca checked her rifle one final time, then looked at the man who'd bought her freedom with gold and was now preparing to defend it with blood. "Ready to show these gentlemen what happens when they threaten the wrong people?" Ezra's grin was sharp as his blade. "Let's give them a lesson they won't forget." The first man came around the boulder expecting to find frightened prey, but Rebecca's rifle spoke first, dropping him before he could raise his weapon. The sound echoed off canyon walls like thunder, announcing that the hunted had become hunters. "Johnson's down," Bradley roared from somewhere above. "Spread out. Don't give them clean shots." But Rebecca was already moving, using the dead man's position to flank the next attacker. Years of tiptoeing through her father's house had taught her to move silently, and now those skills served a deadlier purpose. Ezra provided covering fire from their original position, keeping the remaining men pinned while Rebecca circled toward higher ground. She could hear them calling to each other, their confident voices now edged with worry. "Where's the girl? Anyone see the girl? Thought she was behind the rocks with the cowboy." "Well, she ain't there now." Rebecca smiled grimly as she climbed toward a ledge that would give her a clear view of their attackers. These men had spent so many years thinking of her as helpless property that they couldn't adjust to facing her as an armed opponent. From her new position, she could see 3 figures moving through the rocks below. Bradley was easy to spot, his bulk and loud voice made him impossible to miss. The other 2 were strangers, lean men with the careful movements of professional killers. "Miller," Bradley called. "Take Peterson and circle around behind them. I'll keep them busy from the front." That was the opening Rebecca had been waiting for. She lined up her shot carefully, remembering every lesson her father had taught her about breathing, trigger control, and leading moving targets. The rifle kicked against her shoulder, and Miller dropped like a stone. Before the echo faded, she was moving again, not wanting to give away her position to return fire. "Miller's hit," Peterson shouted. "She's above us somewhere." Panic was creeping into their voices now. 2 men down, 3 remaining, and their quarry was proving far more dangerous than expected. Rebecca felt a fierce satisfaction at their confusion. For the first time in her life, she was fighting back instead of hiding. "This is taking too long," Bradley snarled. "Peterson, light the brush. Smoke them out." Rebecca's blood turned cold. A grass fire in this dry country would spread faster than horses could run. turning their defensive position into a death trap. She had to stop Peterson before he could strike his matches. Moving quickly but quietly, she worked her way around the rocky outcrop toward where she'd last seen the man. Below, she could hear Ezra's rifle answering Bradley's shots, keeping the big man honest while she dealt with the more immediate threat. She found Peterson crouched behind a fallen log, preparing to set fire to a bundle of dry grass and sage. He was maybe 20 feet away, close enough that she could see the concentrated expression on his weathered face. "Don't move," she said quietly. He spun toward her voice, going for his gun, but Rebecca's finger was already tightening on the trigger. The shot took him in the chest, sending him tumbling backward into the very brush he'd planned to burn. "Peterson," Bradley roared. "Peterson, answer me." Silence. "Just you and me now, Bradley," Rebecca called out, moving to a new position before he could locate her voice. "Give up and ride away, and nobody else has to die." His laughter was ugly, full of rage and wounded pride. "Little girl thinks she's won because she got lucky with a couple shots. I've been killing folks since before you were born, and I've been listening to you plan those killings for 5 years, Rebecca replied from a different spot. "I know about the Miller brothers you shot in their sleep. I know about the merchant you robbed and left for the buzzards. I know about the sheriff you bought and the judges you threatened." Each revelation hit Bradley like a physical blow. She could hear him moving frantically through the rocks, trying to pinpoint her location while processing the implications of what she knew. "All of it written down safe where the territorial marshal can find it if anything happens to me," she continued, the lie rolling off her tongue smooth as silk. "Kill me, and you'll have every lawman in Arizona hunting you." "You're bluffing." "Am I? You want to bet your life on that?" The silence stretched long enough for desert birds to resume their calling. Rebecca used the quiet to work closer to Bradley's position, moving like smoke through shadows cast by afternoon sun. When she finally spotted him, he was crouched behind a boulder much like the one she and Ezra had used for cover. His back was to her, rifle pointed toward where he thought she might be hiding. From this angle, she had a clear shot at center mass. But something made her hesitate. Maybe it was the slope of his shoulders, the way he held his head like a man who knew he was beaten. Maybe it was the memory of sitting at her father's kitchen table, listening to Bradley tell stories about his children back in Kansas. "Last chance, Bradley," she called out. "Drop your weapons and ride out of here. This doesn't have to end with more blood." He turned toward her voice, and she saw something desperate and dangerous in his eyes. His rifle was coming up, not in surrender but for one final shot. Rebecca's bullet took him before he could complete the motion. The desert fell silent except for wind moving through sage and the distant call of a hawk. Rebecca stood slowly, keeping her rifle ready despite the stillness. Men like Bradley sometimes carried hideout guns, and desperation could make even dying men dangerous. "Rebecca!" Ezra's voice echoed from below. "You all right up there?" "Fine," she called back. "It's over." She made her way down to where Ezra waited, noting how he studied her face as she approached. She probably looked different now, harder, maybe, or simply more real than the frightened girl he'd bought in Tombstone. "5 men, he said quietly. "You dropped 3 of them yourself. They killed my father. They came to kill us both." Rebecca's voice carried no regret, only statement of fact. "Some problems can only be solved one way." Ezra nodded slowly. "What do we do with the bodies?" "Leave them for the buzzards. Men like that don't deserve decent burial." She looked toward their wagon, still sitting where they'd abandoned it when the shooting started. "We should check our supplies, see what's salvageable." As they walked back toward their scattered belongings, Rebecca felt something fundamental shift inside her chest. The girl who'd spent 5 years pretending to be deaf and helpless was gone forever, replaced by a woman who'd proven she could fight for what mattered. "There's something I need to tell you," she said as they reached the wagon. Ezra looked up from examining the bullet holes in their water barrel. "More secrets." "Not a secret. A choice." Rebecca met his eyes directly. "I'm not the same person you bought in Tombstone. Today changed me maybe more than I realized. If you want to leave me in the next town, find me work somewhere else, I'll understand. Why would I want to do that? Because you rescued a helpless girl who needed protection. What you've got now is a woman who kills people who threaten her. She gestured toward the rocks where Bradley's body lay cooling. That's not what you bargained for. Ezra was quiet for a long moment, considering her words. When he finally spoke, his voice was warm with something that might have been respect. You're right. You're not the same person I bought in Tombstone. He smiled, the expression transforming his weathered face. You're better, stronger, more honest about who you really are. Relief flooded through Rebecca like cool water. So we continue north? To your family's ranch. We continue north, Ezra confirmed. Though I suspect my mother's going to be very surprised by the woman I'm bringing home. As they loaded their remaining supplies and prepared to resume their journey, Rebecca allowed herself to hope that the worst of her troubles might finally be behind her. She'd faced her pursuers and emerged victorious. She'd proven to herself and Ezra that she was capable of more than simple survival. But in the distance, dust clouds were rising from the direction of Tombstone, and Rebecca couldn't shake the feeling that their real challenges were just beginning. The Cole family ranch sprawled across a valley that looked like God had carved it special for raising cattle and dreams in equal measure. Rebecca sat straighter on the wagon seat as they crested the final hill, taking in buildings that spoke of 3 generations working the same land with stubborn pride. Home, Ezra said quietly, but something in his voice suggested the word carried complicated feelings. Below them, a 2-story house sat surrounded by barns, corrals, and outbuildings that had weathered decades of Arizona sun and winter storms. Cattle dotted the pastures like brown and white specks against green grass fed by a creek that sparkled silver in the afternoon light. It's beautiful, Rebecca said, meaning it. After years in Tombstone's dust and violence, the ranch looked like a piece of heaven tucked away from the world's ugliness. Was beautiful, Ezra corrected. Look closer. Rebecca studied the scene again, this time noticing details that prosperity couldn't hide. Several corral rails hung broken and unmended. The barn roof showed gaps where shingles had blown away. Most telling, the cattle herds looked smaller than the pastures could support. Hard times? She asked. Getting harder. Father died 2 years ago. Left debts we're still paying. Mother took sick last winter and hasn't been the same since. Marcus has been carrying the load alone, but one man can't do the work of 3. As their wagon rolled down the slope toward the house, Rebecca noticed a figure emerge from the main barn. Even at distance, she could see the family resemblance, the same broad shoulders and careful way of moving that marked Ezra as a man comfortable with physical work. But where Ezra carried himself with quiet confidence, this man's posture spoke of exhaustion and worry. That's Marcus, Ezra said. My older brother. Fair warning. He's not much for conversation with strangers. Marcus Cole stood waiting on the front porch like a judge prepared to render verdict. 3 years older than Ezra, he'd acquired the particular grimness of a man fighting losing battles against time, debt, and circumstance. So you came back, Marcus said when they pulled up to the house. His eyes moved to Rebecca with the calculating look of someone measuring whether she represented help or another burden. And brought company. This is Rebecca, Ezra said, climbing down and offering her his hand. She's going to help with Mother. Another mouth to feed? Money's tight enough without taking in strays. The word stung, but Rebecca had expected worse. She'd learned not to take offense at first impressions, especially from people carrying their own heavy loads. I earn my keep, she said simply. Cooking, cleaning, nursing, whatever needs doing. Marcus's expression softened slightly, though suspicion remained in his eyes. You got experience caring for sick folks? 5 years nursing my own mother through various ailments before she passed. I know herbs, basic doctoring, how to make someone comfortable when comfort's all that's left to offer. From inside the house came a voice like autumn leaves rustling. Marcus? Is that Ezra? Bring him in here this instant. Mary Cole commanded from her sickbed with all the authority she'd wielded as ranch matriarch for 30 years. When they entered the front room, Rebecca saw where Ezra got his steady gaze and Marcus his stubborn chin. The woman propped against pillows was bird-thin now, but her eyes remained sharp as flint. Illness might have stolen her strength, but it hadn't touched the intelligence that sparked when she studied Rebecca. "And who might this be?" Mary asked, her tone suggesting she already suspected the answer wouldn't be simple. "Rebecca Thorne, ma'am," Rebecca said, stepping forward with a slight curtsy. "I'm here to help, if you'll have me." Mary's eyebrows rose. "Direct answer. I appreciate that. Can you cook anything besides beans and hardtack?" "Yes, ma'am. Bread, stews, roasts when there's meat available. I make a chicken soup that's brought folks back from death's door more than once." "Keep house without breaking everything you touch?" "I've been managing a household since I was 12. Deal with stubborn men who think they know better than women about everything including their own health?" Rebecca glanced at Ezra and Marcus, noting their uncomfortable expressions. "I've had considerable practice with that particular challenge." Mary Cole laughed, the first genuine sound of pleasure Rebecca had heard since arriving. "I think we'll get along just fine. Marcus, show her where she can put her things. Ezra, sit down. We have considerable talking to do." As Rebecca followed Marcus through the house, she caught fragments of the conversation beginning in the front room. Mary's voice, sharp with questions about where Ezra had been and why he'd brought a stranger home. Ezra's quieter responses, explaining without revealing too much. "This room's yours," Marcus said, opening a door near the back of the house. "It's small, but it's private. Window faces east, so you'll get morning light." The space was indeed small, barely large enough for a narrow bed, washstand, and chest of drawers. But after years of sleeping wherever her father's mood dictated, having any room to call her own felt like luxury. "Thank you," she said. "I'll try not to be more trouble than I'm worth." Marcus paused in the doorway, studying her with the same careful attention he probably gave cattle at auction. "Ezra's a good man, but he's got a talent for collecting strays. Usually doesn't end well." "I'm not a stray," Rebecca replied quietly. "I'm a woman who works for her wages and pays her debts. There's a difference." Something shifted in Marcus's expression, not warmth exactly, but a grudging recognition that she might have more backbone than he'd assumed. "We'll see," he said. "Supper's at 6. Mother likes to eat early these days." After he left, Rebecca unpacked her few belongings and tried to process the overwhelming change in her circumstances. 3 days ago, she'd been property to be sold. Yesterday, she'd killed 3 men to protect her freedom. Today, she was standing in a room of her own in a house where people spoke to her like she mattered. The emotional whiplash was almost too much to handle. Through her window, she could see Ezra and Marcus walking toward the barn, their conversation animated by gestures that suggested disagreement. About her, most likely. About whether bringing her here had been wise or foolish. Rebecca understood their concern. She was an unknown quantity with a dangerous past, arriving at a ranch already struggling with problems of its own. But she'd proven her worth before, and she could do it again. From the front room, she heard Mary Cole calling, "Rebecca, when you're finished settling in, come talk with me. I want to hear your story from your own lips, not filtered through whatever version my son thinks I need to know." Rebecca smiled despite her nervousness. Ezra's mother was clearly a woman who preferred truth to comfortable lies. After 5 years of deception, Rebecca found that refreshing. But as she prepared to join Mary for what promised to be a thorough interrogation, she couldn't shake the feeling that her troubles were far from over. Men like Bradley rarely worked alone, and Tombstone was full of people with reasons to want her silenced permanently. The ranch might offer sanctuary for now, but sanctuary was only as strong as the people willing to defend it. And Rebecca wasn't sure the Cole family knew what they'd invited into their home. Mary Cole's interrogation was gentler than Rebecca expected, but no less thorough than a territorial judge examining evidence. For 2 hours, the older woman asked questions that peeled away layers of carefully constructed stories until only truth remained. "So your father sold you to pay gambling debts," Mary said finally, her voice matter of fact. "And these business associates of his followed you here planning murder." "Yes, ma'am." Rebecca kept her hands folded in her lap, though they wanted to shake with the relief of complete honesty. Ezra saved my life twice. Once in that saloon, and again when those men caught up with us. And the deafness was entirely pretense? For 5 years. It was the only way to stay safe in Father's house. Mary nodded slowly, processing this information with the practical intelligence that had helped her survive 30 years on the frontier. Show me your hands. Rebecca extended her palms, letting Mary examine the calluses and small scars that told their own story. These are working hands, Mary observed. Not soft like a lady of leisure, but not destroyed like a field slave either. You've done housework, but you've been fed and cared for adequately. Father needed me functional. Broken tools don't serve their purpose. The harsh assessment drew a sharp look from Mary. Is that how you see yourself? As a tool? Rebecca considered the question seriously. I did. For a long time, that's all I was allowed to be. But lately, she paused, thinking of the rifle in her hands, the moment when she'd chosen to fight instead of hide. Lately, I'm beginning to remember that I'm a person with my own thoughts and choices. Good. People who see themselves as tools get used up quickly out here. Mary shifted against her pillows, wincing slightly with the movement. Now tell me about my son. What do you make of Ezra? The change of subject caught Rebecca off guard. Ma'am. Simple question. You've been traveling with him for over a week. What's your impression of his character? Rebecca felt heat rise in her cheeks. He's honorable, kind without being weak. He could have taken advantage of my situation in a dozen different ways, but he never even suggested anything improper. You sound surprised by that. Most men would have expected certain considerations as part of the purchase price. Mary's eyes flashed with something dangerous. My son is not most men. Neither is Marcus, for that matter. I raised them to understand that a woman's value isn't measured by what she can provide in bed. Yes, ma'am. I didn't mean to suggest otherwise. What did you mean to suggest? Rebecca realized she was being tested, that her answer would determine how Mary Cole saw her going forward. I meant that your son acted like a gentleman when he could have acted like an owner. That says something important about both his character and how you raised him. Approval flickered across Mary's weathered features. Better answer. Now, what are your intentions toward Ezra? My intentions? Don't play coy with me, child. I've seen how you look at him and how he looks at you. There's something growing between you two, whether you want to admit it or not. Rebecca felt her face burning now. I'm grateful to him, of course, but I'm hardly in a position to think about romantic entanglements. I'm trying to build a life where I can support myself, maybe help other women in situations like mine. Noble goals. But life has a way of complicating even the best laid plans. Mary studied Rebecca's face with uncomfortable intensity. Let me give you some advice, earned through 40 years of marriage and motherhood. Yes, ma'am. Gratitude is a poor foundation for anything lasting. If you develop feelings for Ezra, make sure they're based on who he is, not what he's done for you. And if you don't develop such feelings, be honest about that too. Good men deserve better than to be led on by women who mistake rescue for romance. The words hit Rebecca like cold water, forcing her to examine emotions she'd been trying not to name. Was what she felt for Ezra simply gratitude? Or was there something deeper growing beneath her appreciation for his kindness? I'll keep that in mind, she said carefully. See that you do. Now let's discuss practical matters. This ranch needs considerable work if it's going to survive another hard winter. Marcus has been doing his best, but he's only one man fighting a battle that requires an army. Rebecca seized the change of subject gratefully. What kind of work? Fences that need mending, cattle that need doctoring, books that need balancing properly. The house requires attention too, roof leaks, floorboards are loose, garden's been neglected since I took to my bed. I can help with most of that. I'm stronger than I look, and I learn quickly. Good, because we can't afford to pay much in wages. Most of what you earn will come in room, board, and the satisfaction of honest work. That's more than fair. Mary reached for a glass of water on the bedside table, her movements careful and deliberate. There's something else you should know about our situation here. We're not just fighting debt and poor health. We're fighting men who want this land for their own purposes. Rebecca's attention sharpened. What kind of men? The kind who make offers that sound generous until you read the fine print. The kind who point out how dangerous it can be for women and children to live so far from town protection. Mary's voice carried bitter experience. The kind who might find it convenient if accidents happen to people who refuse their reasonable business propositions. Ice formed in Rebecca's stomach. They've threatened you? Not directly, but cattle have gone missing, fences have been cut, and our well was poisoned last month. Could be coincidence, but I've lived too long to believe in that many coincidences. Do you know who's behind it? Suspicions aren't proof. But there's a man named Harrison who's been buying up ranches throughout this valley, usually after the families have suffered enough hardship to make selling seem like their only option. Rebecca filed the name away for future reference. And you think he's orchestrating these problems? I think powerful men rarely dirty their own hands when they can hire others to do their unpleasant work. Mary met Rebecca's eyes directly. Which brings me to my real question. Are you running toward something here? Or away from something? Because if you're just looking for a place to hide, this ranch might not be safe enough. The question demanded honesty, and Rebecca found herself giving it. Both, I think. I'm running from men who want to kill me for what I know. But I'm also running toward the possibility of becoming someone who matters, someone who can make a difference instead of just surviving. Good answer. Because if you're planning to stay, you need to understand that this family fights for what's ours. We don't back down from bullies, and we don't abandon people who've earned our loyalty. Rebecca nodded, feeling something settle into place in her chest. I understand. I hope you do, because tomorrow you're going to meet the neighbors, and some of them are going to be very interested in who you are and why you're here. Through the window, Rebecca could see Ezra and Marcus returning from the barn. Their conversation apparently concluded. Whatever they'd decided about her presence, she'd know soon enough. But for now, she was content to sit with Mary Cole and feel, for the first time in years, like she might actually belong somewhere. Even if that somewhere came with its own dangers and complications. Even if staying meant fighting battles she hadn't chosen but couldn't avoid. Even if the peace she'd found here proved as fragile as desert flowers after rain. The stranger's horse kicked up dust clouds that spelled trouble long before Rebecca could make out the rider's face. But something about the way he sat his saddle made her hand drift toward the rifle propped against the porch rail. 3 weeks at the Cole Ranch had taught her to read the subtle signs that separated friendly visitors from those who came bearing threats wrapped in polite words. Company coming, she called through the open door to where Mary Cole was directing Ezra's repair of a stubborn window frame. Single rider, approaching fast but not panicked. Mary appeared in the doorway, her sharp eyes immediately finding the dust trail. That'll be Samuel Harrison's foreman. Man named Garrett who thinks a badge and a smooth tongue make him important. Rebecca's blood chilled. Harrison, the name Mary had mentioned as belonging to their suspected tormentor. What does he want? Nothing good, I'd wager. Ezra. Marcus. We have a visitor. The brothers emerged from the barn where they'd been doctoring a sick calf, both moving with the careful alertness of men who'd learned not to trust unexpected guests. Marcus carried his rifle openly, while Ezra's hand rested casually near his sidearm. The rider who approached was a lean man in his 40s, wearing a deputy's badge that caught the afternoon sun like a warning signal. His clothes were too fine for honest ranch work, his horse too well-fed for a man living on a lawman's salary. Afternoon, folks, Deputy Garrett called out, reining in his mount near the porch. His smile was all teeth and no warmth. Beautiful day for visiting neighbors. Garrett, Mary replied coolly. What brings you out here? Last I heard, your jurisdiction ended at the county line. Now, Mrs. Cole, you know the law goes wherever justice is needed. I'm here on official business, investigating reports of violence in this area. Rebecca felt Ezra tense beside her. The bodies they'd left in the desert 3 weeks ago. Someone had found them, asked questions, followed trails that led here. What kind of violence? Marcus asked, his tone suggesting he already knew the answer. 4 men found dead near Devil's Canyon. Shot to pieces, left for the buzzards. Local folks are worried about bandits operating in the area. Garrett's eyes moved slowly across their small group, lingering on Rebecca with particular interest. Funny thing, though, these weren't random killings. Someone took the time to search the bodies, removed anything that might identify them. Almost like whoever did the shooting knew exactly who they were killing. Terrible business, Mary said with perfectly performed shock. I do hope you catch whoever's responsible. Oh, I intend to. See, I've been talking to folks in Tombstone, piecing together stories about strangers passing through, asking questions about certain business transactions. Rebecca's mouth went dry. Garrett knew about the sale, probably knew about her father's death too. This wasn't a fishing expedition. It was an interrogation disguised as casual conversation. One particular story caught my attention, Garrett continued, his voice taking on the practiced cadence of a man building toward an accusation. Story about a girl who got sold to a stranger, then disappeared along with her buyer. Girl who might have known things that certain people preferred stayed secret. Sounds like gossip to me, Ezra said quietly. You know how frontier towns love their wild tales. Maybe, but then I heard about a young woman working here now, someone new to the area. Someone who might have answers to questions that need asking. Garrett's gaze fixed on Rebecca like a hawk studying a mouse. Miss, I don't believe we've been introduced. Deputy James Garrett, at your service. Rebecca stood slowly, acutely aware that every word she spoke would be weighed and measured. Rebecca Thorne. I help Mrs. Cole with household duties. Thorne. Now that's interesting. Had a man named Jeremiah Thorne turn up dead in Tombstone last week. Shot in his own saloon. Apparently interrupted some kind of robbery. The lie was delivered so smoothly that Rebecca almost believed it herself. But she'd seen enough of her father's business dealings to recognize a cover story when she heard one. Someone had killed father to tie up loose ends, then spread a convenient tale to explain his death. I'm sorry to hear that, she managed. I hope his family finds peace. Family's an interesting word. See, Mr. Thorne had a daughter who went missing around the same time. Deaf girl, supposedly, though some folks are starting to wonder about that too. The trap was closing with surgical precision. Garrett knew who she was, knew about her deception, probably knew about the men who died pursuing her. The only question was what he planned to do with that knowledge. Lot of people go missing in Arizona territory, Marcus said, his voice carrying warning. Desert's not forgiving to folks who wander where they shouldn't. True enough. But this particular girl might be very valuable to certain people. Valuable enough that they'd pay handsomely for information about her whereabouts. The threat was barely veiled now. Garrett wasn't here to arrest anyone. He was here to collect a bounty, to sell Rebecca's location to whoever was willing to pay the highest price. Gentlemen, Mary Cole said with icy politeness, perhaps you should conclude your business. Sunset's approaching, and we have evening chores to complete. Garrett tipped his hat, the gesture mocking rather than respectful. Of course, ma'am. Just want everyone to know I'll be investigating this area quite thoroughly over the next few days. Asking questions, examining evidence, making sure justice gets served. He gathered his reins, then paused for one final shot. Oh, and Miss Thorne? If you remember anything about those missing persons cases I mentioned, I'll be staying at the Prescott Hotel. Always willing to listen to helpful information. As Garrett rode away, leaving another dust cloud in his wake, Rebecca felt the temporary safety she'd found at the ranch cracking like ice in spring sun. The past had caught up with her again, and this time it wore a badge and spoke the language of legal authority. How much does he actually know? Ezra asked once the deputy was out of earshot. Everything that matters, Rebecca replied quietly. He knows who I am, knows about father's death, probably knows about the men we killed in the desert. Then why didn't he arrest you? Mary Cole answered before Rebecca could speak. Because he's not working for the law. He's working for Harrison, which means he's more interested in profit than justice. What kind of profit? Marcus asked. Rebecca felt pieces of a larger puzzle clicking into place in her mind. The kind that comes from selling information to the highest bidder. There are still men in Tombstone who want me dead. Men who'd pay well for confirmation that I'm alive and hiding here. So we're not dealing with one corrupt deputy, Ezra said grimly. We're dealing with everyone he might choose to sell us to. The sun was setting behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of blood and gold. In the growing darkness, the ranch that had felt like sanctuary now seemed terrifyingly exposed, surrounded by empty land where enemies could approach unseen. We have tonight to prepare, Mary said with the practical calm of a woman who'd faced crises before. By tomorrow, Garrett will have sent word to whoever's paying him. After that, we'll have company whether we want it or not. Rebecca looked around at the three people who'd welcomed her into their home, who were now facing danger because of secrets she'd brought with her. The guilt was almost crushing, but beneath it lay something harder and more determined. I won't let my troubles destroy your family, she said firmly. If I leave now, head north toward Canada, maybe? You'll die before you reach the county line, Ezra interrupted. Garrett's probably got men watching the roads already. Then what do you suggest? Mary Cole's smile was sharp as a blade. We stop running and start fighting. But first, we're going to need help. Marcus, how fast can you ride to the Hendersons' place? Hour and a half if I push hard. Why? Because it's time this valley's honest folks stopped letting bullies pick us off one family at a time. As full darkness settled over the ranch, Rebecca realized their quiet struggle for survival was about to become something much larger and more dangerous. But for the first time since leaving Tombstone, she wasn't facing that danger alone. The question was whether solidarity would be enough to survive what was coming. Dawn broke gray and ominous, with storm clouds gathering over the mountains like an army preparing for battle. Rebecca stood at the kitchen window, watching riders approach from 3 different directions, and felt her heart hammer against her ribs as she counted at least 8 men converging on the ranch. They're early, Marcus said grimly, checking his rifle for the dozenth time. Figured we'd have until noon before they made their move. Through the front window, Rebecca could see Deputy Garrett leading the largest group, his badge glinting in the pale morning light. But the men flanking him weren't lawmen. They had the hard faces and easy violence of hired guns, the kind who killed for money and slept soundly afterward. Ezra, Mary called from her chair by the fireplace. Help me up. I won't face this sitting down like an invalid. Ma, you should stay. I should do no such thing. This is my house, my land, and my family they're threatening. I'll meet them on my feet or not at all. Rebecca admired the steel in the older woman's voice, but she could see the cost of standing upright in Mary's pale face and trembling hands. Pride was keeping her vertical when her body wanted to collapse. Mrs. Cole, Rebecca said quietly, there's still time for you to hide. This is about me. Not. Child, when you accepted work at this ranch, you became part of this family. We don't abandon family, no matter what the cost. The sentiment was beautiful, but Rebecca couldn't shake the feeling that the cost might be higher than any of them were prepared to pay. Through the window, she could see the riders spreading out to surround the house, cutting off escape routes with military precision. 23 men, Marcus reported from his position at the side window. All armed, most of them strangers. This isn't just about collecting you anymore, this is about making an example. Rebecca's stomach dropped. An example? Harrison's been trying to buy out every ranch in this valley for 2 years, Ezra explained, never taking his eyes off the approaching riders. Families that won't sell have been suffering mysterious accidents, losing cattle, finding their wells poisoned. We've been too stubborn to take his hints. So he's decided to stop hinting, Mary concluded. Remove us all at once. Claim we were harboring fugitives and got what we deserved. The realization hit Rebecca like a physical blow. Her presence hadn't just brought danger to the Cole family. It had given their enemies the perfect excuse to destroy them completely. Every person who died today would die because she'd been selfish enough to accept their protection. I'm going out there, she said suddenly. I'll surrender myself. Tell them you were all innocent victims who didn't know who I really was. Absolutely not, Ezra replied immediately. It's the only way to. It's the way to get everyone killed, including yourself. You think Harrison's going to let witnesses survive? You think he'll spare people who've seen his methods? Before Rebecca could argue further, Garrett's voice boomed across the yard. Cole family, come out peaceful and nobody gets hurt. We're here for the fugitive girl. Nothing more. The lie was delivered with such confidence that Rebecca almost believed it herself. But she'd learned to read the subtle signs that revealed men's true intentions, and everything about this situation screamed violence. What's the range from the house to the barn? She asked Marcus. 40 yards, maybe 50. Why? Because that's where they'll expect us to run if we panic. Which means they'll have it covered. Marcus looked at her with new respect. You think like a soldier. I think like someone who's been hunted before. The question is, do we have any advantages they don't know about? Mary Cole's smile was sharp as winter wind. Funny you should ask. Marcus, show her the root cellar. Marcus led Rebecca to what looked like a simple wooden cabinet in the kitchen corner. But when he pulled away a false back panel, she saw stairs leading down into darkness. Connects to the barn through an old mining tunnel, he explained. Father dug it during the Apache troubles. Figured we might need a way to move unseen. How many people know about it? Just family. Father made us swear never to tell anyone, not even close friends. Rebecca felt a spark of hope. If they could reach the barn unseen, they might be able to circle around behind their attackers, turn the hunters into the hunted. Cole family. Garrett called again, his voice carrying less patience. You've got 5 minutes to send out the girl. After that, we come in and take her. We need a distraction, Rebecca said. Something to keep their attention on the front of the house while we move through the tunnel. I'll handle that, Mary said with grim determination. Been wanting to have words with James Garrett for quite some time. Ma, you can't. I can and I will. Someone needs to keep them talking while you three get into position. I'm the only one here they won't immediately shoot. The logic was sound but heartbreaking. Mary Cole was volunteering to face down 23 armed men to buy her family time to fight back. There has to be another way, Rebecca protested. There is no other way. And before you start feeling guilty about the choices I'm making, remember that this ranch has been my life's work. I'd rather die defending it than live watching it get stolen by cowards and bullies. Through the windows, Rebecca could see the men growing restless, checking weapons and shifting positions. Time was running out for all of them. If we do this, Ezra said quietly, there's no going back. Once the shooting starts, it's kill or be killed. Then we'd better make sure we're the ones doing the killing, Rebecca replied, surprised by the coldness in her own voice. As they prepared for what might be their final battle, Rebecca thought about the strange journey that had brought her to this moment. 3 weeks ago, she'd been property to be bought and sold. Today, she was preparing to fight alongside people who'd become family, defending a place that had become home. Whatever happened in the next hour, she wouldn't go quietly into whatever darkness awaited. Outside, Garrett's voice rose again. Time's up, Cole family. We're coming in. Mary Cole straightened her shoulders, checked the pistol hidden in her dress pocket, and walked toward the front door with the dignity of a queen approaching her throne. Time to find out what we're really made of, she said. And with those words, the battle for the Cole ranch began.